The only poll that counts is the one on election day. Have you ever heard that? If that were true, you'd think pre-election polling would be small business. Nobody would care, and results would not rate much of a mention. But we know that's not true. In fact, poll results drive the political narrative, inform marketing decisions, and political and business leaders use polls to understand what people really care about. Polling and market research is big business. Billions of dollars are spent on polling. Rough estimates of 2024 election cycle spending on polling sit around $800 million US. And that doesn't include the media's polling shown on TV and socials every night. Polls can be serious business. Polling has real consequences. In an example from Australia, Malcolm Turnbull challenged the then Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott for the leadership specifically because Abbott had lost 30 consecutive polls to his opponent. Turnbull became Prime Minister himself and remained PM for just under 3 years. Of course, then Turnbull himself lost 38 consecutive polls. And to the surprise of no one except Turnbull, he was thrown out by his own party based at least somewhat on the polling precedent he'd established. Donald Trump has said he ran for the US presidency when the results of numerous polls said it was a good idea, that he had a real chance to win, that he had political support for his candidacy. In the UK, then PM David Cameron was initially opposed to holding a referendum on EU membership, but public opinion, bolstered by strong support for the Leave campaign and various polls, pressured him to commit to a public vote on Brexit. So polls are a big deal whether we like it or not, and they have real consequences. But we keep hearing that they're always wrong. People offer excuses, and there's always plenty of theories. But are they really inaccurate so much of the time? How hard can it be to poll people accurately? Why don't pollsters just do better and adjust their models? And if most polling is wrong, why do politicians use it to drive decisions? In this video, we'll look at what polling actually is, what defines an incorrect polling result, and consider how wrong these inaccurate polls actually are. And finally, and maybe more importantly, we ask the big question, the elephant in the room: why do we care? Opinion polling is a method used to collect information about public attitudes, beliefs, and preferences on various topics. This data helps governments, businesses, researchers, and organizations understand the opinions of specific groups or entire populations. At its core, opinion polling involves gathering information by asking a sample of people questions about a particular issue or topic. The results are then used to infer the attitudes of a larger population. For example, if a political candidate wants to gauge their approval ratings, they might commission a poll to ask a representative sample of voters about their views. Polling typically relies on statistical sampling, meaning that a relatively small group of respondents can provide insights into the opinions of a much larger group, provided the sample is properly chosen. Modern polling techniques involve detailed survey design, but perhaps some people don't realize that it also relies heavily on advanced statistical models, and sometimes cutting-edge technologies like machine learning to analyze data. Questions are carefully crafted to avoid bias, and pollsters strive to ensure the sample accurately represents the demographics of the target population. This means considering factors like age, gender, education, income, and geography. While humans have always been interested in the opinions of others, the formal practice of opinion polling began relatively recently. The concept emerged only in the early 19th century, as modern democratic governments emerged and the idea of public opinion being valuable gained prominence. One of the earliest examples we could find of informal opinion polling took place in the US in 1824, when local newspapers conducted what were known as straw polls to predict the outcome of the presidential election between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. These straw polls were unscientific by modern standards, often relying on small and non-representative samples, but they marked the beginning of efforts to systematically gauge public sentiment. Modern opinion polling as we know it began in the 1930s, pioneered by figures like George Gallup, Elmo Roper, and Archibald Crossley. Gallup, in particular, revolutionized the field by introducing scientific sampling methods. In 1936, Gallup gained fame by successfully predicting Roosevelt's victory in the US presidential election, while the Literary Digest, a prominent magazine, got it wrong, despite surveying millions of people. The Literary Digest failure was due to sampling bias. Their survey disproportionately included wealthier individuals who were more likely to vote for Roosevelt's opponent. Gallup's success underscored the importance of representative sampling and rigorous methodology, establishing opinion polling as a credible tool for understanding public opinion. Over the decades, polling methods have evolved, incorporating advancements in technology and statistical analysis. So how is it actually done? Pollsters first need to identify the purpose of the poll and define the questions it needs to answer. Questions should be decisive and tailored to the target audience. Deciding whether questions are open-ended or multiple choice can have substantial implications. Then we come to the sample. Honestly, this is where polls run into trouble. Ideally, the sample should accurately represent the population being studied, but that is almost impossible. We'll come back to that in a minute. Data is collected via telephone interviews, online surveys, face-to-face interviews, or even text messaging, and those methods affect that pesky sampling problem. Then once the data is collected, it's analyzed using statistical methods to draw conclusions and determine the margin of error, confidence intervals, and trends. And don't forget, opinion polling serves a variety of purposes across different sectors. One of the most well-known uses is politics. Political leaders, parties, and governments use polls to understand public sentiment on policies, issues, or candidates. This information can guide decision-making and campaign strategies. Regular polling allows leaders to track their popularity and adjust their messaging or policies accordingly. And thirdly, pre-election polls are widely used to forecast outcomes and identify trends in voter behavior. While not always accurate, they provide insights into the dynamics of an election. Media organizations commission polls to inform their reporting and provide readers with insights into public opinion on current events. Polls are also used to create engaging stories and track societal trends over time. Note the value media companies gain from interesting poll results, regardless of their accuracy. You can draw your own conclusion about that. But it's not all politics. Businesses use opinion polling to understand consumer preferences, improve products, and develop marketing strategies. For example, polls can reveal what features customers want in a product. Companies can assess how their brand is viewed by the public, and surveys can measure whether an ad campaign resonates with its target audience. Academics and research institutions use opinion polls to study societal issues, track changes in attitudes, and test hypotheses. Polling data contributes to fields like sociology, political science, and economics. Nonprofits, advocacy groups, and think tanks use polling to demonstrate public support for a cause, strengthening arguments for policy change, and understanding what issues matter most to people helps organizations focus their efforts. So with all those use cases and potential customers, and with all that money thrown at polling, how hard is it to deliver an accurate result? While opinion polling is a powerful tool, it is not without its challenges. If the sample isn't representative, results can be skewed. For example, online surveys might overrepresent younger, tech-savvy individuals. Low response rates can lead to inaccuracies, as those who choose to participate might differ significantly from those who don't. Poorly phrased or leading questions can influence responses and distort findings. Polls are snapshots of a moment in time and may not accurately predict future behavior, especially in fast-changing situations. Polls capture the opinions of respondents at the moment they're conducted, which can change dramatically due to events, news cycles, or shifts in public mood. For example, a candidate leading in a poll today might see their numbers plummet next week due to a scandal or a strong debate performance from an opponent, or change for no particular reason. And finally, misinterpreting or overgeneralizing results can lead to misleading conclusions. Other lesser-known aspects of polling methodology include sampling bias, where polls rely on representative samples, but it's challenging to ensure they're fully reflective of the population, especially with declining response rates and shifts to online polling. Weighting adjustments are where pollsters adjust the raw data based on demographics like age, race, gender, and political affiliation to align with population estimates. These adjustments can introduce errors if the assumptions are off. It is those assumptions that are the magic sauce that sets different polls apart. Question wording effects are where the way questions are framed can significantly influence responses. Subtle changes in language or order can lead to very different results. Many people misunderstand a poll's margin of error. A poll with a plus or minus 3% margin of error means the results are statistically likely to fall within that range a certain percentage of the time, but it's not a guarantee. Non-response bias is where certain groups are less likely to participate in polls, perhaps younger people or those with distrust in institutions, which can skew results if not accounted for. And trust me, it must be accounted for well. Opinion polling continues to evolve. driven by advancements in technology and changes in communication habits. Online and mobile polling methods are becoming more popular, while big data and artificial intelligence offer new ways to analyze public sentiment. At the same time, pollsters must adapt to challenges like declining response rates and the need for greater transparency in their methods. Another big factor is that polls don't always accurately predict the turnout of voters. Yes, some polls attempt to measure likely voters and not registered voters, but it's possible people change their minds about heading out to vote at the last minute. That likelihood can't be easy to measure. Right, so here's this week's elephant in the room. It is said that polls largely failed to predict the 2016 Brexit referendum, Donald Trump's elections in 2016 and 2024, or the results of the 2019 Australian federal election. These were all unexpected Conservative triumphs. Does that indicate the Conservative vote was inaccurately measured by pollsters? The idea that Conservatives are more likely than Liberals to refuse to talk to pollsters or provide misleading answers is part of a broader theory, often referred to as the shy conservative or social desirability bias phenomenon. While there is some anecdotal and limited empirical support for the notion, the evidence is mixed and far from conclusive. Here's what we know. Research has shown that conservatives are sometimes less likely to respond to surveys than liberals, particularly in the US. This may stem from distrust of institutions, including the media and pollsters, that conservative voters might view as biased. Studies on shy Trump voters in 2016 suggested that this effect might have contributed to some polling errors. However, subsequent research, including experiments designed to test for hidden Trump support, found that it likely had only a small impact overall. Some researchers use implicit or indirect questioning to detect whether respondents are hiding their true preferences. These methods have occasionally suggested hidden conservative support, but the evidence is inconsistent. Pew found that Republicans in the US are slightly more likely than Democrats to be underrepresented in polls due to lower response rates. However, this effect seems to be modest and doesn't explain all polling misses. After the 2016 and 2020 US presidential elections, some post-mortem analyses indicated that a portion of the polling error could be attributed to non-response or response bias among conservatives. However, other factors like underestimating turnout among certain voter groups also played significant roles. Additionally, some conservatives might provide answers they perceive as more socially acceptable due to fear of judgment, perhaps on sensitive issues like race or immigration. Evidence for this bias has been documented, but it is not exclusive to conservatives. Liberals might also underreport socially undesirable opinions depending on the context. Similar claims about shy conservatives have been made in other countries, for example Brexit polling in the UK. But polling errors are not always systematically in one direction, suggesting that this isn't a universal pattern. Also, contrary evidence abounds. There did not seem to be an underestimation of conservative vote in the 2020 US presidential election. And if anything, Trump's vote was lower than expected in some key battleground states. The conservative vote at the 2017 and 2019 British general elections was overrepresented slightly. Bottom line, there is some evidence that conservatives may refuse to participate in polls at slightly higher rates or provide misleading answers in certain situations. But this is not a well-documented, universally consistent phenomenon. Polling inaccuracies are often due to a combination of factors, including sampling issues, turnout modeling errors, and demographic weighting challenges, rather than any single cause like conservatives lying to pollsters. Most people, not just conservatives, don't allow themselves to be polled, so the results depend more and more on statistical adjustments. And if anything, that's the real problem. But wait, don't polls have margins of error, as we discussed earlier? And don't those margins account for these issues? Most polls report their margins of error at plus or minus 3% at a 95% confidence level, meaning if the poll were conducted 100 times, the results would fall within 3% 95 times. But one thing to note, the margin of error applies to the total sample, for example likely voters or all adults. But subgroup analyses, for example by age, gender, or race, often have higher margins of error due to smaller sample sizes. And margins of error also account for random sampling errors, but not systematic biases. For example, underestimating turnout from a specific group, which can lead to larger polling misses. In summary, while plus or minus 3% is typical for most major polls, the real-world error could be larger if there are systematic issues beyond random sampling variability. Consider that there have been more than 5,000 elections in the US in the last 20 years: presidential, congressional, and gubernatorial. What percentage of those 5,000 do you think had results within 3%? Well, while it's not easy to find detailed, publicly available analysis of all U.S. elections in the last 20 years. A well-known estimate of those election results that fall within 3% is 5 to 10% of total elections. Given there were over 5,000 elections in that time, we see that there may have been as many as 500 election results within polling margins of error. For example, the poll had no better hope of predicting the winner than a toss of the coin. That did, however, include the U.S. presidential elections of 2016, 2020, and 2024. And on each occasion, polling didn't help us predict the outcome. So some polls are more accurate than others. But when elections are close, and results will fall within margins of error, what value do they have? Let me put it another way. If a candidate is obviously going to win, and the polls show them leading by 20 points, we don't get much value from the result. If the election is evenly split and on a knife edge, within the margin of error, then the poll can't adequately predict the winner. So what's its value? Who cares? Legacy media loves polls because it gives it something to talk about. But do voters actually care what the poll says 2 years out from Election Day? What about 2 days? Maybe political candidates can use polling to drive their agendas. Should elected officials pursue the will of their constituents, or were they elected by those constituents to use their best judgment regardless of the most noisy agitators? Can't poll results just show that people need educating on an issue? If local candidate X is polling low, does it mean they're unpopular and unlikely to win? Or does it mean people have just never heard of him or her, and they need more exposure? Betting agencies had Donald Trump the clear favorite to win in 2024, and if you wanted to bet on the outcome, you got more accurate odds there than in the big-name polls. So what data do bookmakers use? They run their odds based on people who have put their money where their mouths are. But can they really know? No, it's not very scientific. But maybe it's worth thinking about the likelihood that respondents to YouGov polls might subconsciously be tuning the candidate they think will win, not the one they want to win or plan to vote for. Also consider whether voters are swayed by the poll after it comes out. Do voters think to themselves, I was going to vote for Party A, but now that I see it's way behind, I won't bother voting, or I'll vote for someone else? Maybe? Do people vote for a local winner, so they're more likely to be represented in the parliament or Congress by the winning party? Does that help? Is that more likely if the respondent is an independent and seeking to be represented only by a congressman that's in the winning party? The exact origin of the phrase, the only poll that counts is the one on Election Day, is unclear. It's been used widely by politicians and campaign strategists over the years to emphasize that pre-election polls are speculative and that voter turnout on Election Day ultimately determines the outcome. The phrase gained prominence in U.S. political discourse in the late 20th century and is often attributed to various political figures. It reflects a sentiment common among campaigners aiming to motivate supporters to vote. Unless you work in the polling industry, the media, or professional politics, I'd argue that you shouldn't really care that much. When the nightly news or social media posts make an argument based on polling results, why not simply ignore it? The poll might well be inaccurate. Is the result of the poll going to change the way you vote or feel about an issue? Is your opinion really swayed by the opinion of the majority? So let's put polls into perspective. And remember, the only poll that counts is on Election Day. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and comment below. We really do read everything. And please consider subscribing. See you next time.